All right, welcome back. This is part two of chapter eight. We're going to talk about these last four leadership models, not in as much detail as the other ones. And the first we're going to talk about is Bowman and Deal's reframing leadership and management and organizations model. Right, Bowman and Deal's reframing leadership model suggests that there's a contingency or situational leadership oriented focus. There are critical variables that assist you in choosing the style that you want to have to be successful. So again, this is a contingency or situational leadership, meaning that it will change depending on the situation. All right, there are four constructs that are considered important in this model: the structural, human resources, political, and symbolic. So first, we're going to talk about the structural construct. So the structural construct is considered the frame, and this is how organizations work, how they establish formal relationships, and how groups facilitate coupling. Now, if you remember, we talked about tightly coupled organizations have strict adherence to policies. This is, do they follow the rules, procedures, and expectations? Loosely coupled have less adherence to those organizational policies. So in the structural construct, you have several assumptions that organizations work best when governed by rationality and norms, and that organizations' goal exists to accomplish established goals. They have to fit in the situation, and specialization permits more productivity and individual expertise. Coordination and control of all of these is essential to effectiveness. Back to specialization, those with expertise are expected to perform the task within their expertise. For instance, you wouldn't use a PT who specializes in pediatrics to see more sports medicine patients on a regular basis. If they're specialized in pediatrics, you would expect them to be highly productive and provide better care in the area in which they're specialized. Within the structural leadership, leaders do their homework. They develop a new model of relationships between structure, strategy, and environment. They focus on implementation, and they're continually experimenting, evaluating, and adapting. So leaders in the Bowman-Deal model within the structural construct reinvent the organization often. They know what's needed, they develop new strategies, implement them, and adapt. Next in the Bowman-Deal model, the next construct is human resources. So within the human resource construct, this embraces more the theory why model, so that individuals want to work and they want to be there. Within this Bowman-Deal model and the human resources construct, organizations exist to serve human needs, and organizations and people need each other. They believe that the people who work there want to be there, and that the organization also wants them there. Also, within this human resource construct, when the fit between the individual and the organization is poor, one or both will suffer. The individual will be exploited or will seek to exploit the organization. If there's a good fit between the individual and the organization, it's a more meaningful and satisfying work experience. Organizations get the human talent and the energy that they need, and the individual gets out of the organization what they need. So think back to a time when you've ever had a job that didn't fit you, or one that you saw other people, they just weren't a good fit. Um, Often either the organization or the individual will suffer, and many times it's both. You want employees who are satisfied by their job and want to ensure that the job is continuing to be a good fit. So, how do you lead within this construct? Leaders believe in people and communicate that belief. Again, we're talking about communication and how important that is. Leaders are visible and accessible, and they empower the employee. They increase participation, provide support, share information, and often can move some decision making as far down the organization as possible. So those who are working and doing the main grunt of what the organization is, they have a say in the decision of the organization. All right, the third construct within Bowman and Deal's model is political. Often people, when they think of political, they think of something negative, but in reality, it needs to be used in an organization. So the political construct deals with the resource allocation within an organization. The aspect of this construct is that it creates a web of relationships to gain and allocate resources. And so sometimes political assumptions are based on power, conflict, or coalitions. So within the political construct, this frame suggests that organizational goals are set through negotiations among members of coalitions. A typical organization has a confusing set of many goals, and many people are in conflict with one another reaching these goals. So sometimes you can use your coalitions to um, gain support for other goals that people may not want to be working towards. So, how is leadership within the political construct? So, leaders need to clarify what they want and what they can get. They assess the distribution of power and the interests. They build linkage to other stakeholders. And they try to persuade first, negotiate second, and use coercion only if necessary. It is much better to persuade someone to do what you want them to do than to have to negotiate with them, and definitely better than having to coerce them. Okay, the final construct within the Bowman and Deal model is symbolic. And so this deals with meaning. A dimension gets at the heart of what the organization members feel about issues and events. It is important, what is important is not the event, but what it means. So, how you can lead in this, you interpret experiences and transform leaders who are visionaries. You use symbols to capture attention. You frame the experience, so you reduce the ambiguity and uncertainty. You discover a communication and a vision, and you tell stories. This one is harder for many people to grasp, but I think with symbolic leadership, a lot of times, thinking back to past when I've seen symbolic leadership used, um, at staff meetings, when someone performed really well, they got we used to have a silly little trophy. And whoever had the best customer reviews for that week got this trophy, and they kept it on their desk until the next staff meeting. And it was granted to the person that next week who had the best patient reviews. And so symbolically, you had this trophy on your desk for a week, 2, 3, sometimes 4 weeks, and everybody knew that you had performed well that week. Right, so this is just a review of the four constructs. So with symbolic, set clear goals and information, have a well understood cause and effect relationship, use strong technologies and information systems, low conflict, low ambiguity, low uncertainty, and you have stable, legitimate authority. In the human resources construct, it is um, you want to increase employee leverage and decline or improve employee morale and motivation. Um, Make sure that there is this area works low with conflict and uncertainty, so your focus is on hiring the right individual. Right, with political, this is good for declining resources. You can leverage political leadership and to diffuse any unstable distribution of power. And with symbolic, this is good for unclear or ambiguous goals, a poorly understood cause and effect relationship. And this chart is on page 200. This just talks about um, when it is important or pressing to use different types of constructs within a leadership situation. So take a look at this and make sure that you understand it. All right, the fourth model we're going to talk about overall, I guess, second of this podcast is Lens Leadership, Art, and Science in Public Leadership Model. And this model is pretty simple. It talks about that situation leadership models are correct but difficult to prove, and there needs to be a balance between the art and science as the best method for improvement and development. And Lynn's model talks about there's 4 areas that or 4 factors where are dependent on success. So one is personality. So we talked about personality a lot at the beginning of this class. We did self-assessments and talked about personality for leadership. What is the best personality for leadership? Well, there's not always one right answer. It depends on the situation, but having the appropriate personality for the situation is imperative. Skills and experience, making sure that you have the science understanding of leadership and those skills of being able to work with other individuals, as well as the art of leadership of being able to handle individuals. A design for change. So some leaders want to maintain the status quo, but true leaders should want to change. And then favorability in the situation. So understanding the situation that you're leading and is your leadership correct for that situation. All right, the 5th leadership model is Uckel's multiple linkage model. So the key issue in the Uckel multiple linkage model is the interacting effects of the leader and the situational barriers on organizational performance. So in this, in the short term, they evaluate and intervene to improve effectiveness. But in the long term, they want to change the situation to better match the organizational strength and goals. So the leader behavior affects the intervening variables, which in turn affects group performance. So with the Uckel's multiple linkage model, think of different variables, a formal reward system. So again, reward can be money, but it can be many other things. We've talked about that in the past. Intrinsically motivating properties of work. So what are some of the intrinsically motivating properties of physical therapy? Now, it would help making patients better and seeing these wonderful gains that patients have can be very intrinsically motivating. Technology, so improving technology to improve performance. This can be a more user-friendly EMR system or different technologies that help with keeping track of patients. So any technology that helps with patient or job performance. Geographical distribution, so are the right people in the right place. Policies and procedures. I wonder how many of you, when you went in for your clinicals, the first thing they did was hand you a policy and procedure manual. This used to be a big thing. I did it at every clinic I went to for many years, but often got nothing out of it reading policy and procedures. But some do need to be known. I mean, if you think you had a code blue or whatever the organization called a code when someone quit breathing or their heart stopped beating, did you know what to do as a student? Those are some of the policy and procedures that need to be known. And then informal practices that have evolved over time. So this is the reality of how are things done. This can include scheduling patients, billing practices. Many times organizations do things like they've always been done, and stepping back and taking a look at how things need to evolve can be beneficial. So in Uckel's multiple linkage model, the leader is in control, an effective leader at least, of the situation and of the organization's status quo or their political environment. So you want to be the leader in charge of moving the organization forward instead of just continuing the norms. All right, the final leadership model we're going to talk about is Hargrove and Glidwell's impossible leadership model. That doesn't sound good, right? Impossible leadership. All right, in this plan, the more able a leader is at developing contingency plans, the better he or she can be at mastering the ability to effectively and quickly implement these plans. And then they will be perceived to be a better leader. This model is based on the impossible jobs in leadership, such as those that are elected, appointed, or in the public good and service arena. Often this is you deal with more with coping rather than leading, and sometimes that coping is what takes center stage. Right, and so in this impossible leadership model, the leader learns to evaluate the coalitions, the political, governmental, and public coalitions, and incorporate these coalitions into a vision for the organization. If you're an entrepreneurial leader, you need to be flexible, dynamic, and stand with expert power. You will direct the organization through political storms, manage emotional and structural equilibrium, and use your coping strategies. Um, they suggest that an accommodation strategy works better than a consensus creation strategy with this. And in many of you, you talked about the conflict resolution and accommodation strategy. And for most of the self-assessments, or not self-assessments, I'm sorry, reflective journals that I saw, those who used an accommodation strategy, it didn't always work out too well in the long term. All right, and here's an overview of the last four models that I talked about. Trying to find what page this is on. This is on page 202 in your book. And so it just talks about whether the leadership model is short-term or long-term, what the foundation is, what the focal point, what system is employed, and the important skills of a leader. So make sure you go over this. All right, thank you. If you have any questions, please have them ready for class.